Now, Gilbert, I hate to shift gears on you this way because I know it's not a happy thing, but the time came when was it January the 15th, 1968?
January the 15th, 1968. I had just left the Continental Baking Company and to go home, and I went on. I left the bakery a little after 12 o'clock, and it didn't take me but about 10 minutes to get there because I lived over in Forest Hill Park. And I had just gotten home and gotten ready for bed, and the telephone rang, and it said, "Gilbert, your church is on fire." And I put my clothes back on and went back, and other than losing my members of my family, it was one of the most devastating things that's ever happened to me in my life. As a matter of fact, it was the most devastating thing ever happened to me, other than members of my family.
I want to show you some pictures that Joan Wilson gave me, and I've had them, I've blown them up so we can see them a little bit better. Talk to me about the way the church looked that day.
This is exactly the way it looked here. I'll tell you that. And this was, I thought 1949 was trying times. But I believe this was the toughest of all. We were things was real tough, you know. You're sitting there and your church is in ashes. And, well, where am I going? What am I going to do? And our sister church had just burned down the year before over there.
Pace Memorial.
Pace Memorial,
yeah.
In Monroe Park.
Yeah.
And I stuck my neck out that day when, after that happened. And I didn't know what to do this trip, and I said, well, I can't stick my neck out anymore. Anyway, we maybe I'll just kind of skip this. I think we could have been treated a lot better, I'll just say this. Wow. But we had a friend up in the next block by the name of Reverend Herb Baldwin, that my good friend over there knows, Tom Edwards. He also knows him. Yeah. And he came to our rescue.
Harry was the rector at St. Andrew's.
St. Andrew's Episcopal Church.
Yeah.
And he came and he saw the board chairman, of course, and their minister. And he saw me and he said, Gilbert, all of us, he said, we have a school around now that we don't use on the weekends, and you people are welcome to use that school until you can come up with something that will help you solve your problem. And in the meantime, they had started a church out here called Grace Methodist, and from what I could understand, or what we could understand, they were having a hard time trying to get off of the ground. And so it was brought to our attention by Dr. Leitner, if I recall.
George Leitner.
Who was the district superintendent at that time. You got 10 acres of ground out there if you want to put a building on it. And we could do a little bit about that. And I would like to add a little bit to that, too. After we had a fire around there one night before we burned down with a stove. You remember the stove that sat down in the basement? Well, they were doing some work around there one day, and somebody smelled smoke. And it had caught on fire with the rafters between the ceiling and the sanctuary in the basement. And that's what saved it that day. And so another family of people, two families of people, the Seifert family and the Tucker families were all bricklayers. So Gilbert had got another task. So he gets them two families together, and he asked them would they put flue linings and then chimney. I said, you know, the building is old, it didn't have it. That's why we had the problem. And they very graciously, is that what you want us to do? To put? Yes, sir. We'll be happy to put brake. I said, I know, but we need them in that back chimney where that furnace is too. So anyway, they spent about a month on Savages. Those two families, the Tucker family, and there's a family of those people there right now that come there. Charlie Sneed married Mr. Tucker's daughter, and I'm trying to think of her name. Linwood Tucker had two children. Joyce. And they are members of our church. And then the Seifert family, they have all died that moved out to this church, except one daughter. They have a daughter who married Maurice Dooling, who is a member of this church. And they are great people, and I miss them. I miss them terrible. And it hadn't been long since I talked to one of them. And anyway, this was just trying times, because these things that I've said here and mentioned, they didn't happen just overnight. I mean, it was a time element in here. We was up at St. Andrews for parochial school for a number of months. And thank God for that. Otherwise, we would have had absolutely nothing, because we didn't know what we were going to do. We were just kind of floundering around, because the area in which we lived, most people didn't think you ought to put another church up there, down there. But the way I see the future of that place, I think one day it's going to be one of the booming places of the city of Richmond.
It is now, isn't it? It is as it's developed. I'll show you that. Now, that's probably the most devastating of all the
Oh, my
photographs.
goodness, yeah, I don't even want to, I saw that.
Okay.
What made it so hard for me, fellas, they hadn't been long made me, I guess you're a trustee, or made me something else, but that long list I already had, and they gave me the job working with the M&M destruction company, I call it, to come there and take it down. And of course, Ollie Parrish, my longtime friend, he and I were down there every day. But something did happen down there nice one day. The minister came down and went through, and I was standing on the corner, and he said, down at Albemarle, and he said, I asked him, I said, they had a board meeting, you know, have they got a loan for the new church yet? And he said, no. I said, they haven't. He said, well, I said, well, wonder why they haven't got it. He said, they're working on it, Gilbert. Well, fellas, I'm going to make this statement because I made it to him, but y'all know I couldn't get a loan in an hour. But I looked at him, I was so let down, I looked up at him and I said, but by cracker, I can get a loan. I said, I can get somebody that can get a loan on it in an hour. And I'm going to go get it.
And you did, too,
And I got in my automobile, and I went over, I don't know if it was the Monroe Terrace or the other one, that Ollie Parrish was superintendent. And he and a man by the name of Moses Nunley Jr. used to play together. And Moses Nunley Jr., his father, was a friend of mine and a friend of everybody's at Laurel Street, not just Gilbert Ferguson, everybody's. He picked up the tab every October of what we were short, and we were short year after year. And I remember the last one quite well. Ollie came into the store which I worked, and before Mr. Nunley died. And I said, well, how much did we have to ask Mr. Nunley for this time? He said, $1,125. Every year he picked up the tab to pay out all of our expenses to the Methodist conference and to pay our bills out. And I said, you know, he owned a home beneficial insurance company. I says, I know a man can get that loan. Ollie Price can go get his playmate and get all the loans he wants. And I went there, and I asked Ollie about it, and he said, I said, would you ask Moses Nunley? He said, yeah. I said, well, you know, let's stop beating around the bush. And he said, okay. And he said, we'll get right on it. I said, yeah, we get on it. Guess we'll get on the telephone. He said, well, Gilbert, you know, it's hard to get the chairman of the board of a place. I said, you tell that lady that you was his playmate and that you have some important business to conduct with him. He got on the telephone and he got a hold of Mr. Nunley. He really did. And he said, Ollie, do you know Mr. So-and-so? He said, yeah. He said, well, he lives in your building in the Presswood. Said, he is a treasure out here. But I will tell him you called, and when you see him tomorrow, you talk to him. Fellows, that's all she wrote. That was the loan right now. When he saw the gentleman the next afternoon,
now that was
it was all cut and dry.
That was a loan for St. Andrews.
That was a loan for him.
For here. And that brings me around to another subject, and that is these years that since 1968 that you've been a vital part of St. Andrew's Church.
No, I
the first
been
thing I want to
much,
ask you about, why did they name this St. Andrews? Someone told me that they thought it might have been in honor of what the gesture that Harry Baldwin made at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church when Laurel Street burned down.
There is I don't know, I can't answer your question there. I don't think exactly, I don't know all the particulars.
Maybe I'd be starting a new rumor. I don't know.
Yeah. But anyway, it seems that there's a possibility that may have had something to do with it. But I did hear that one of the apostles was St. Andrew, you know.
That's correct.
And what was the lady's name that worked for the state that taught that latest Bible class around here for Argyle Glenn? And I think Argyle mentioned that name, St. Andrews. I'm not sure. I'm not too sure about that. But I was disappointed that it didn't name it Laurel Grace. I wanted each church to retain its identity. Yeah. And I thought Laurel Grace would have been very appropriate, and I'd change it tomorrow if I could.
Once the decision was made to come out here and join with Grace Church, tell us about the way this church developed.
Well, I think you need somebody now. There is a gentleman sitting over there with us today that was really on the building plans. The only thing I had to say was when you build it, make it one step high.
That's right.
I did say that. And so my good friend over here, Tom Edwards, you answer that question for him.
Well, you know, Gilbert, that was almost 40 years ago, and that was in a day before anybody was really emphasizing handicapped accessible structures, and that was a visionary thing to do that, because as a result of that, this church has been very accessible for people with disabilities, and if it had been built in other ways, it wouldn't have been, and probably a lot of money would have had to be spent to make it that way.
Well, I had the privilege of being pallbearers for a lot of people at Laurel Street Methodist Church, and it was really, it was really a chore. Not a chore. That's the wrong word. It was always a privilege to be a pallbearer. But you really wanted to make sure that you done the very best that you knew how in handling the deceased. And going up those steps, most of the time people, they weren't accustomed to doing something like that. And then the thing that really convinced me was one of the most loyal and dedicated members that we had at that church was Chief Parrish. He was a chief, he was a battalion chief, no, he was assistant fire chief to Chief Taylor, because there's one of the assistant chiefs sitting right over there. And that poor soul would come in a wheelchair, and we would take him up the steps. And I would say, if I ever have anything to do with building the church, the only step it's going to have is a carving off a street.
That's right.
And his good son said the same thing.